Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar this week. I'm Liz Mangus, Literacy Specialist with Saddleback Educational Publishing. We're so glad you're joining us today. As usual, as you're logging in, if you could locate the control bar, which is at the bottom of your web browser window, and that is where you will find the chat, the Q&A, and the live transcript icons. If you'd like to take advantage of subtitles today, you can select Live Transcript and then click on Show Subtitles. If you have questions throughout our presentation, you can go to the Q&A area and put your questions in there, and we will get to those as we can. And of course, my favorite, the chat. We love it when you chat with us today, and we would love for your participation. So if you could go to the chat, open it up, select everyone from the drop-down menu, and just say hello and let us know where you're joining us from today. All right, don't forget we are on Twitter. So Saddleback is on Twitter, and our presenter today, Kathryn Starke, is also on Twitter. Feel free to go there, follow us, say hello, let everyone know you are joining us for this conversation today. We'll get started in just a couple of moments. Let's say hi to Kathryn. How are you?
Hi, Liz. Great. How are you?
I'm great. I want to see who is jumping in here. Okay. Hi, Robert. Robert Kim is here. As you are logging in, everyone, if you could go to the control bar and hit chat, select everyone from the drop-down menu and let us know where you're joining us from. So, Kathryn, where are you located?
I am in Richmond, Virginia today.
Okay. And how's the weather in Richmond? We always do a weather check everywhere we are.
Good.
So.
It was freezing this morning, but I mean, freezing for us is 35 degrees. So we're already up to the 60s. So we're good to go.
So you're good. And there hasn't been any sort of drastic weather changes recently. Like we had a pretty cold week here, but now it seems to be getting hotter again. So I don't know.
Yes, we're in the same on the East Coast. We were in that cold morning, and we're going to be back in the 70s by the weekend, which is lovely.
That's actually kind of perfect. That's like my favorite kind of weather. Hi, Margaret. Glad you're joining us today. We have a few people who've jumped in. It's a little early yet, so more and more people will be logging in as we get going. Hi, Bernadette. Welcome. Let us know actually what you teach as well. That might be helpful to know as we get going on our session today.
Yes.
So I know Robert teaches adults, but I don't know about Margaret or Bernadette. So if you feel so inclined, go ahead and drop that in the chat. Let us know what you teach. I'm guessing secondary, but I don't know. Don't want to make any assumptions, right? Welcome, everybody. All right. So we got a couple more minutes before we get started. I'm hoping that I can actually be efficient this weekend and get ready for Halloween. Like, I don't know, anybody out there with small children? I talked about this last week. I was like, I got to get going on Halloween, and I still haven't done anything. So maybe this weekend is my weekend. I can go get the Halloween costume and the Halloween candy ready to go. So that's my goal. All right, we have high school resource teacher. Thank you. Yvette says she's a special ed director for pre-K through 12. Margaret says she teaches high school ELL English. Okay, great. We're going to have some great information for you today. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, so let's kind of formally begin our topic today, supporting readers at the secondary level. We know that in terms of reading levels, our students are, there's quite a range, right? And especially at the secondary level, this can be a challenge if you are not familiar with, if you weren't trained in how to teach reading, you might be feeling a little bit stuck. So Kathryn is joining us today to cover this topic and give us some great information for supporting readers at the secondary level. This is her first time presenting with us, so welcome. Let me give a brief bio so everybody knows sort of where you're coming from and what your experience is. So Kathryn Starke is a nationally recognized urban literacy consultant, reading specialist, author, adjunct professor, former inner city elementary school teacher, and founder of Creative Minds Publications. She has a bachelor's degree in elementary education and a master's degree in literacy and culture from Longwood University. She is the creator of Tackle Reading, an annual reading education initiative supported by the NFL, which is really cool and kind of fun. So thank you so much for joining us, and I will let you take it from here. You can go ahead and take the screen control now.
Thank you, Liz. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I am so excited to be with you all in the Saddleback educational community. And I absolutely appreciate Saddleback for hosting this topic, as it is certainly one that is relevant and certainly one that we need to discuss. And there's so much work to do around this topic. So supporting readers at the secondary level. Again, thank you everyone who's already here and telling us where you're from and what you teach. Honestly, while I'm going to be gearing this today to our secondary readers and our secondary learners and educators, hopefully there are nuggets of reading information that you can take back to support any child that you are working with. Because reading, as we know, is a developmental journey. It is a lifelong reading process. And in 2022, we have readers at the secondary level that are truly reading from oftentimes first and second grade all the way up. And that's what we're going to really focus on today. So let's start by just thinking. And I love how people are already in the chat, because I want you to feel comfortable, if you're joining us live today, to put your thoughts and ideas in this chat. How can we restore a positive experience with reading for adolescent readers? We know that children of all ages are reluctant to do something that they struggle in. And I always think about kindergartners and how when kindergartners start school, they're so excited, and all they want to do as a 5-year-old is learn to tie their shoe by themselves, ride their bike by themselves. And number 3 is they always want to learn to read by themselves. It's always a goal of a child who's hopped into kindergarten off the bus for the first day. And then I think about that same child certain amount of years later in 3rd grade, and then years later in 6th grade, and then years later in 8th grade or 11th grade. And all of a sudden that child is no longer excited about teaching reading. And so we know the reason is because they're a struggling reader. We don't like to do anything that we're not great at. And so if along the way we haven't had the perfect reading instruction that matched our needs, and I see that somebody just wrote right here about differentiation, if we weren't matched with the right text, which we're going to get into today, and if we weren't really engaged or made excited about reading and celebrating our strengths and our challenges in reading, our children are not choosing to recognize that reading can be a positive experience. So as a secondary teacher, and I love being in secondary schools, and I absolutely am in a lot of secondary schools this year because of our current situation in literacy. But until we can think about how to create a classroom that promotes the love of literacy, how to provide text that is engaging and relevant and timely and gets kids hooked and connected, until we can think about how to organize our day that keeps our kids busy and working and understanding how important words are and expressing themselves, we are going to have a hard time. And so by the end of our session today, I want you to be able to take away some things that you can instantly implement tomorrow that are going to really create a positive experience. It's going to help our readers at the secondary level become excited about reading all over again. And it does start with how we're planning our instruction. So whether you have a 45-minute block, a 60-minute block, a 90-minute block, in that block, how many opportunities do you give your student every single day in each block or each class to do each of these things? So to read, to write, to comprehend, and yes, to even listen to you read, especially when we have a classroom of reluctant readers or children who are labeled struggling readers, or English language learners who might be struggling with reading, whatever it might be. Listening to you read is going to make a great impact in their 90-minute block. And I love thinking how I can put all of these components in. So at the end of my block, my students have had the opportunity to do all 4 of these things. So not a whole group lecture just about one text, and not a whole block about writing, but truly like a 10-minute moment read aloud where all they have to do is listen to you, which will help their comprehension automatically, because we know that listening comprehension is higher than our silent or oral reading comprehension. And then, of course, collaborating, reading with their peers, and truly showing what they have learned to read through writing and through discussion. All of these opportunities are simply going to increase our students' engagement in literacy on a daily basis. If you can think back to 2019, when none of us knew what was ahead for us in our world, and especially today for our purposes in the world of literacy and education. I cannot take credit for this beautiful image. You'll see at the top that it has been created by We Are Teachers and an educator named April Regard. And this particular screenshot I kept on me last year is a true reminder to see that truly students were missing 2 years of traditional in-person, differentiated, small group, hands-on manipulatives in their reading instruction, and that makes a difference. Our children who had first and kindergarten not in that traditional setting are missing their foundations of literacy, our really basic reading skills. And guess what? We cannot retain 150 children in every grade level in this pandemic and post-pandemic scenario. So all of these children have gone on. And so now you're in middle school and high school. And as a teacher, you may be experiencing children that are still reading at 3rd, 2nd, 1st grade, because you can see that last year, our students' last normal school year was a few situations before. And I do love how Angelica just commented how that never is so sad, because last year, those children did not ever know what a new school year experience was until they finally started back for the 2021-2022 school year. So yeah, just a really good reminder for all of us. So think about this for a moment and feel free to just think about it in your own head. If you would like to add it in the chat, feel free, whatever you feel comfortable doing. But I want us to think about these important questions when it comes in education can be a problem for us.
Okay, so hold on. We had some people jump in right when you got dropped, and they said, "Can you recap?" So I happen to have your slides on my computer, so I pulled them up. I just ran through the recap. So now I'm going to stop share, and you can pick up where you left off. Perfect timing. Okay, great.
Oh my goodness. Okay, everyone, I can't even explain it, because we know that you really truly don't know what's going to happen when you're in education and when you're using technology.
There you go.
So here we are. I left us all on a self-reflection moment. So the question would be what you all thought in terms of our students' preparedness. Do our students have that literacy knowledge to be successful in all subject areas? And how can we easily implement all of our reading strategies into our lessons or units to support literacy across the content? And this is the question that I say, if you want to jot your response in the chat, feel free, or just think about in your daily instructional practices right now, what you are noticing in terms of our students' knowledge, and then our next steps. How can we implement these strategies no matter what subject you teach at the secondary level? And here's what we can consider. If our students do not have the literacy knowledge that they need to be truly successful in all subject matters, there is a simple solution. And one of them is simply goes back to how we're planning our instructional block. And a lot of secondary teachers in the past have not really had to focus on one-on-one instruction or small group necessarily, or it hasn't been a part of their schedule, because a lot of times we would do a balance of literature and then writing. But we're seeing now that our students, especially our reluctant readers, this one-on-one and small group instruction is going to make the greatest impact. So when we go back to our read and write and collaborate and listen and have them really, really listen to you read, where in there can we put in one-on-one instruction in small group? And it might not be for everybody, and it might just be for some selected students, and it might be a different group every single day. But when we can truly hone in on their strengths and challenges in small group, that is going to make a huge difference. Another thing is some of the practices that we're going to talk about today briefly should be incorporated in all subjects. So there are things that we can do in every subject matter to help increase our vocabulary, to help increase our comprehension, and to help increase our writing. And so I invite us all to think about specific practices that we can use in these three components in all subjects. So writing about social studies and writing about science and thinking about vocabulary words in science and how that's going to help us become better readers. In addition to getting our kids motivated, excited, engaged in literacy and learning, another huge factor that comes into our student success is their comprehension. And our comprehension is determined by our background knowledge and experiences. And our lack of background knowledge and experiences can significantly impact our reading instruction. And so we need to take a moment every time we introduce a new text to ask our students what they know about a subject. If you live in a rural community and you're reading a book about skyscrapers and city life, what is their background knowledge to understand this text? This is very, very evident when our secondary students are reading nonfiction information and they are lacking an understanding of periods in history or scientific discoveries or famous Americans. They're lacking this knowledge, and so they're unable to really comprehend or understand their nonfiction article or even a historical fiction novel. And I was really excited to do this today for Saddleback and get to dive in and manipulate and play with some of their text. And I got excited about teaching reading all over again when I was going through, because we can use so many of their books for our secondary readers on a variety of topics. And so I am looking at these 4 titles right now, both fiction and nonfiction, and trying to determine what our students' background knowledge is. So, Medal of Honor, do our students understand military, and do they have the family or friends that have been in the military, and how important a Medal of Honor is? The Little Rock Nine, do they know where Little Rock is in Arkansas? And understanding that the Little Rock Nine were 9 children who helped desegregate or integrate a high school in Little Rock, Arkansas. Gnarly sports injuries. So, talk about motivating. One of our students might really get excited talking about this book because it's crazy, gross, disgusting, out of this world sports injuries. And then, of course, our fictional text, The Magic Phone. And our secondary students seem to be living on their phone these days. So they certainly have background knowledge about what the capabilities of their phone are and what it can do. And then next steps, all right. So we know what our phone can do for us in real time, real life, but let's see what additional special things the Magic Phone can provide for us. So, considering taking just a few moments before any literacy lesson to see what the kids already know about a topic through their own experiences, and then, of course, what information you can give to them real quick to help them understand better. So, if I were able to host an episode of Family Feud, my question would be this: what are the 5 components of literacy instruction that are required to teach children to read? And I so appreciate these comments in the chat already about even things about writing across the curriculum with sentence stems and things like that. I would love to know who knows what these 5 components of literacy instruction are. If you happen to know, drop them in. Liz knows all 5 of them. But if anybody happens to know, I'll give you just a few seconds to see before I reveal these answers. But when I'm thinking about reading instruction, we really do have to make sure that every lesson we prepare for our students includes these 5 pillars of reading, these 5 components of reading. And so you may have been thinking about them in your mind and not 100% ready to throw it in the box yet. Oh, but Stephanie just did. And vocabulary is one of them. And phonemic awareness is one. And comprehension is one. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Fluency is one. And Kellen, I'm going to use your decoding. I'm going to change it to phonics. And with that, we have our 5 components of great reading instruction. It doesn't matter what grade level you teach, it depends on the literacy level and understanding of our students. And I've actually put these in a specific order because our phonological awareness, which is the overarching umbrella, or phonemic awareness, is really often an early literacy skill, and it's all oral language development. And we obviously have to understand orally sound letter relationships before we get into phonics, which is reading and writing of sounds, decoding and putting together, decoding and encoding, which is our spelling. Fluency, so being able to fluently read with automaticity, which if you have strong phonics skills, you can do. Vocabulary, and of course, our ultimate goal of reading, which is comprehension. So, how can we incorporate all of these into our literacy lessons? Well, I always find it very, very fascinating that 3 of our 5 pillars of reading happen to revolve all around words and word work. So, our students actually need to see how reading and writing are connected through words, how reading, writing, science, social studies, reading a menu, driving to school are all connected through words. And when we're planning for reading, When we recognize that 3 of these pillars have to do with words, we do start to adjust our thinking of how I'm going to ensure that phonological awareness and phonics and vocabulary are part of my daily instruction. Secondary teachers will often say to me, that they don't do phonics, which I get it, because we really are teaching the foundations of reading and early phonics patterns in elementary school. But developmentally, phonics actually goes from kindergarten through 7th grade. So even if you're a 7th grade teacher and you have a child that's reading on 7th grade level, the phonics at that level is suffixes, prefixes, Greek and Latin roots, all of these things. So phonics certainly has to continue into the secondary level as our words obviously become more challenging and certainly multisyllabic. And I always love to point out how some of our oral language skills are also secondary skills. So an early literacy skill like rhyme, that's going to help us, especially when we're getting into rhyme and poems and poetry in the secondary level, alliteration, of course, in our text as a literary device, and syllables. We teach syllables and how to clap syllables and stomp out syllables at an early age. But if we can actually have every student just show us how to decode a word by syllables and how many parts are in that word, our decoding is going to increase dramatically at the secondary level by simply focusing on that. How can we use that small group environment to have phonics practice if we don't want to always we want to take our block, remember, and break it down efficiently and effectively. So perhaps while I am working with a small group, I can have another group working with phonics. And at this grade level, they can do so many things independently. And we can do Scrabble with them, words with friends they know about, wall art, they can do graffiti around the classroom, all focused on particular patterns and prefixes and suffixes and things like that. You can give them sorts. For example, just a real quick one I put here is if I gave them the word spect and I gave them the word port and I put on a timer for a minute, how many words can they come up with that have spect and port in the beginning of the word, the middle of the word, or the end of the word? So when we're talking about background knowledge of text, we can also talk about background knowledge of words and word work. And this is just a quick example of how to do that. When it comes to word work in terms of vocabulary, we all know that vocabulary increases by the amount of reading that we do. We also know that a lot of our students that are reluctant or struggling readers are not reading, and so their vocabulary development is not as high. Unfortunately, we're never going to know exactly what word will stump our students because vocabulary is often associated to our own life and previous experiences in life. So you might have children that know every little vocabulary word that has to do with trucks and transportation or cars. And then they're reading a book about, pioneer days, and that vocabulary is foreign to them. But what we can do, and Robert just gave some excellent ideas as well to support vocabulary, but we can always use syllabication to have our students figure out what it means. And children should actually be able to identify for us any unknown word. And I want children to go through a text and tell me what they don't know. And that means if they can't pronounce the word, please note it. But they can pronounce it and don't know what it means, please note it. Because I end up figuring out what my kids don't know through this activity. I remember being in a classroom where a few weeks ago, and the teacher just assumed that every child knew the word rescue. And they knew what the word rescue meant once it was read to them, but they couldn't figure out the word rescue to code rescue on their own, which means that they didn't understand the text that they were silently reading until the teacher brought them back and talked about those words. So when we can think about word work and vocabulary to front load our text, it's going to make the greatest difference. And understanding, of course, how writing and reading are connected through words and how they go hand in hand. And these are just a few bullets of some writing activities that you can do in your block. See how they range from writing about reading a text to writing about curriculum to creative writing to prompt writing, whatever it might be. Sentence stems are great. Thank you so much for adding that. And any other ideas that you have or you've used or you've seen for writing, please feel free to also add that right into our chat box. One-minute paper, or muddiest point paper cam. Also, recently I have talked about, and the Freyer model, great. We even talked about recently this hexagon model where the students are all given truly little hexagons that are provided for them, and you just write an idea or a sentence or a word on the hexagons and you rearrange those in a strategic order to make your writing feel more consistent and that the sentences all go together and make sense on the same topic. So writing and talking about what you're writing and thinking about what you're writing, great ideas. Thank you so much for sharing those. So another little thought, again, feel free to put it in the chat if you're with us live or think on your mind. How can you plan every literacy lesson differently to incorporate these 5 pillars of reading plus writing? So now you know the 5 pillars that must be present for every lesson. How, if we don't do this already, are we going to begin incorporating all of these plus writing on a daily basis in whole group, in small group, and one-on-one for our students to achieve reading success? How can we do that? Well, step 1, we want to select an appropriate title for interest in reading level. If I provide a text for my students on their reading level, great. But if they're not interested in it, their comprehension and engagement are going to decrease. If I can find the magic touch in a small group setting or a one-on-one setting where I find a text that matches their reading level and their interest level, I'm even more excited. And I loved going through Saddleback's resources for that purpose. And I had to choose this particular title. I had to choose King Odysseus and the Cyclops by Homer, because when I was in a classroom last week, I was in an 11th grade classroom and they were doing the Odyssey. And most of the students were not reading on 11th grade level. And when I found that this text exists on a 2nd grade level, I thought, this is amazing. This is exactly what our kids need. So you're still learning the classics, but you're able to read it. And so by the time you have your 11th grade reader and your 2nd grade reader finishing this book, you can see all of the vocabulary is still there. The Trojan War and Ithaca and King Odysseus and ancient Greece. We're still getting the same information from the text, but at your reading level. So I loved this. So number 1, I am selecting that best match to meet the interest and reading level of my students. And if I don't want to necessarily focus on The Odyssey, or a classic literature that's in my grade level standards. I love that in October, we can really do mysteries. This actually comes under the horror genre that I found today. I found some students last week reading Edgar Allan Poe, really seeing how we can use October to our advantage. I personally like using mysteries, horror, things like this because they teach inferencing, foreshadowing, and drawing conclusions. Some of the hardest reading skills for our students. But when our students are provided with a mystery that forces them to think and to infer and to draw conclusions and maybe make a prediction of who the suspect is or not, and use their evidence and clues, all you're doing is encouraging your students to really expand their reading knowledge and their literacy brain. And talk about engagement. You know, they might not be necessarily focused on day one of the Odyssey, but they are going to be focused and engaged on day one of It Came From Below. And I also included just a real page here because I just wanted you to note that I went through this book myself and I chose the text that I wanted to use and I chose some words. So you'll see the word flashlight, you'll see the word curious, and I'm about to put everything together for you to include all the 5 pillars in this one lesson. And note that this particular text happens to be a 1.6 to 2.0 grade level. Again, reaching the needs of your students. So I'm putting it all together. I've selected my text and I'm going to incorporate background knowledge and our 5 pillars of reading. So my background knowledge might just be a question stem, like, how do you feel when you watch a scary movie? Or have you ever been to a haunted house? Or talking about horror movies, and if you have seen any, and obviously I'm at the secondary level when I'm talking about topics such as this. Phonological awareness. Yes, I'm including this in my lesson because it's oral language. And oral language includes hearing syllables and hearing multisyllabic words and hearing even compound words. So stock room, downtown, flashlight, all of those words were in my text. And I just want to make sure that my students can tell me how those words are similar or different. We can also think about what phonics skills our students need. I happen to choose, because this was a 1.5 to 2.0 or 1.6 to 2.0, I chose beginning and ending blends. When I went through my book, I saw the word smile, I saw spoke, I saw beast. So really being able to identify words at the beginning and end, just those blends, is what I was going to do. Perhaps my students could go on a word hunt for more words that begin and end with those blends. Our fluency always comes into place when our students are reading independently. So whenever you have students silently reading, reading with a partner, reading to you at a small group table, they are always practicing their fluency. So as soon as you have a text, you're good to go with that. Vocabulary. I just chose 3 words from the first section. So when I'm planning, I might not have time to do the whole text in one day, and that's perfectly fine. In fact, if we really want our kids to understand the vocabulary and the comprehension around it, we don't want to just read the book for reading's sake. So I cut the book in half for my planning purposes. And so the words public, security, and curious, and you saw curious on that page, were in the beginning of the book. So telling the students in the very beginning, these are our 3 words, and seeing how they already know what those words mean and if they can use these words in real life experiences. have, where are they seen in public, or what's a public arena they know about? Security, what does that mean? Do we have security at our school? Things like that. And then lastly, putting it all together with comprehension. So asking and answering those questions, writing about what we're reading. I mentioned earlier that I would truly be focusing on inferencing and foreshadowing and drawing conclusions, but you would certainly want to say, whatever your grade level standard is, your pacing guide at your time of year, how can you correlate that with a best book to mix and match and put everything on together? So I don't know if you are like me in the sense that I truly could talk about reading and writing and literacy and planning all day long. And unfortunately, I only am able to speak with you today for, our little brief session. So I do want you to know that if you ever want to learn even more about reading or writing and literacy, these are just two of the books that I have written and published to help us really dive into literacy instruction. And also there is a link that was posted in the chat box about our resources from today. So thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you so much for staying with me today. And we're going to turn this right back over to Liz.
Okay, as we are talking about, Robert has a question. I was just going to prompt everybody for questions. Now is the time. We have a couple minutes for questions if you have any. So Robert wants to know if you're familiar with Cornell notes.
No, but I'm loving this. And involves selecting sentences from your notes in class and writing a response and making questions. So I like that. I mean, it certainly does, even though everything always has different, different notes and different ways of formatting. I definitely believe that going into a text and using your textbook evidence to take your notes and to create questions is one of the best ways to really apply what we've learned in our reading. So I'm so glad he said that.
Thanks for your question, Robert. I'm curious for those who
Yeah.
For those who are joining us for the live session, how many of you feel like you already plan around those 5 pillars? Or conversely, if those pillars were news to you, that would be interesting for me to hear as well. And while you're thinking about that and maybe adding your thoughts to the chat, I will go ahead and take the screen share back. All right, there we go. So if you are looking for information on other Saddleback webinars going forward, you'll want to check out our website. That's where you can find out what is coming up. And also you should be able to find links there to any sessions you may have missed to our YouTube channel. You can also just go right to the Saddleback YouTube channel as well if you prefer that. But that's where you will find more information on Saddleback webinars. Don't forget, we have our new Go Decode. These are our decodable texts for tweens. So if you have students in grades 4 through 8 who need age-respectful beginning phonics books, this should be your go-to resource. Definitely reach out to us if you'd like more information about this. Let me go back to the chat here. Robert said he was familiar with most of those 5 pillars. That's good. That's I love to hear that. All right, let me see if we have any other further questions. Looks like we've got all the questions taken care of. So with that, this is where you can find Saddleback. Please reach out to us if you have questions or need any information. Thank you so much for joining us, Kathryn, and thank you so much to all of the teachers and leaders out there who've taken time out of their day to join us. We appreciate you, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everybody. And thank you so much, Kathryn. That was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody. See you next time.